I was in Erbil, Iraq, and I left on June 8th, just a month ago. And I've been going back and forth to Iraq, but mostly in the last few years has been in Kurdistan and the Erbil region in the north, because for safety and security reasons. Iraq was going through sectarian violence. The Kurdish part of it was really quite safe and doing quite well. But in the last several months, there has been a tremendous amount of problems between the Kurds and the central government of Baghdad, between central government of Baghdad and the Sunni population and other places. And in fact, the government in Baghdad has cut off the budget from the Kurds for the last 6 months. There was a lot of anxiety about what's going on. So as I landed in Erbil, I really expected to see that kind of anxiety, that trepidation and worry. But I found the exact opposite. There was a sense of optimism, a sense of hope, and growth and camaraderie. And what struck me, well, one of the favorite places I always go, and Erbil is a very ancient city, it's about 6,000 years old, is the old citadel. It's that's now become the UNESCO's one of UNESCO's international heritage city. And they established a park. It's about 500-acre park right in the middle of the city, called the Sami Abdurrahman Park, named after a Kurdish leader who was assassinated a few years ago. It's one of my favorite places. I go for walks. So I said to my brother, I said, let's go for a walk to the park. And what has struck me, first of all, is coming from the business that I have done, it was wonderful urban plan in the middle of the city. And there's this park, and it's used, heavily used, young and old, men and women, Kurds and Arabs. What has also struck me is that here it is, the whole dichotomy, problems between Kurds and Arabs and central government. The city of Erbil was full of Kurds coming in from, a little higher. All right, I'll speak louder. All right. And you'll see the Arabic families from Baghdad, from Mosul, from Basra. Some want to just move to Kurdistan because of safety and security, and some wanted to go there as investors and buying properties. It was really a wonderful sense. It wasn't just the park, it was in the cafes and the what we call the chaykhana, the tea houses. So a sense of great optimism. And as I was leaving, coming back to Portland, this was on June 8th, I sent an email to family members and friends that I had seen, and I titled it Erbil Observations, and I shared with them this sense that I have felt coming in there. I land in Portland on the 10th, and the very first thing that I saw was in the news, ISIS takes over Mosul. In just a very, very quick flash. And Mosul is the second largest city in Iraq. It's a city of about 2 million. And this was what ISIS were planning and doing, in fact, was predictable. But the way they did it and how quickly they conquered this large city was not. It was a big surprise. Now, but of a diversion about Mosul. The last time that I was in that city was in 1989. I visited Mosul and I took my daughter with me. Her name is Melissa. She had just graduated from Berkeley, and this before she went to the Peace Corps. So we went to Mosul. We landed in Baghdad, and at that time, 1989, it was just a year that the Iraq-Iran war ended. It was a sense of what people referred to Iraq in those days as a republic of fear, that the fear dominated by the brutality of Saddam Hussein. But anyway, we were in Baghdad, and one of the areas trips we always liked to go to was the Iraqi Museum in Baghdad. It was built in the 1930s by Gertrude. It was actually the passion of Gertrude Bell. Any of you who have the history of the Middle East, Gertrude Bell had a huge influence And she was a British foreign officer and worked with Churchill and during the First World War and with Lawrence. And she stayed in Iraq. She stayed in Baghdad and loved it until she stayed there for 30 years. And she established this museum in the model of the British Museum. And it was one of my favorite places. It's full of incredible historic artifacts, from the Babylonians to the Sumerians to the Assyrians. So there's a lot of history in that area. And then a few days that we were there in Baghdad, we stayed with my brother and his family. We had people come visit us. There were Arab Sunnis, there were Arab Shia, there were intellectuals, there were artists. It was, in spite of the fear that everybody sensed there was a community. And then we drove up all the way up to Mosul. And on the way, as you see in the map, the birthplace, we passed over the birthplace of Salah ad-Din, who was a Kurd and created the Ayyubi dynasty. And we went to Mosul when we visited Nineveh, which is the capital of the Assyrian Empire. And Mosul was very diverse. It's a very diverse city. It has a lot of Christians. It has the Chaldeans, it has the Assyrians, it has the Yazidis, and it has a very large Kurdish population. The vast majority are Arab Sunnis. And then from there we went to Erbil, and Melissa got to meet family members and experience the Kurdish. So that was the Mosul then. And now when you look at the news and you see that ISIS group of 10,000 fighters come in and take over the city. And the takeover, the military garrison of the Iraqi army of close between 30 and 40,000 abandoned ship. They all left their weapons and took off. And they did it because the officers left. So in a few days, the ISIS, which is the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, which Sham in Arabic is Greater Syria, or some people refer to it as ISIL, Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, which includes Lebanon in that. And they did it very, very quickly, and immediately the border patrol of Iraqi army disintegrated. So the group took over the border between Syria and Iraq. And they took over the city of Tikrit, which is the birthplace of Saddam. And the Iraqi military left city of Kirkuk, which is another large city, which is the city what's called in the major oil city in the north, predominantly Kurdish. And that is a city in dispute, and it's supposed to be resolved. And they left their garrison. And what happened when they left Kirkuk is the Kurdish military, the Peshmerga, moved in to take care of Kirkuk. It served two purposes for them. One, Kirkuk has always been their dream. It's like their Jerusalem. And when they established the line so the ISIS group cannot cross. So now what happens is that the group, the Islamic State, they changed it to the Islamic State, establishing a caliphate, which is a whole different bold statement. They control most of the northwestern and western part of Iraq, and northeastern and eastern part of Syria. It's as a landmass, is larger than Indiana. And they've established themselves in their major cities. And if you look at the map, and when you look at the Kurdish area, which is up in the northeast, the line now between the Kurdish region of Iraq and the ISIS-controlled region of Iraq is about 1,000 kilometers. And now the line between the Kurdish region and the main Iraqi central government is only 50 kilometers. So you have a whole different dynamics going on today. When you look at, and of course everybody, the attack and the takeover by ISIS took everybody by surprise. Even though some people predicted the ISIS attack, but not that swiftly, and not that the Iraqi military had disappeared so completely. So the question now is now, we've been in Iraq as the US for the last close to 10 years, 2003, 2011. We have lost close to 5,000 Americans and tens of thousands wounded. Hundreds of thousands Iraqis have died. Several million are refugees and homeless, internal and external. So the question, and there are over $1 trillion spent. And then we left, and the government, in a short period of time, collapses. So the question is, why? How can this happen? How possibly this can we allow it? Or did we have the control for us to even allow for this to happen? And secondly, what should we do about it? What can we do about it as a country, as the US? I mean, so these are fundamental questions, because today, Iraq really is a broken country. It is divided. And now you do whatever we want to do, it's very difficult to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, because it really is broken. So, and what you have in this environment is we are caught of bringing the country back, our mission saying, no, we have to get Iraq whole the way it was. It won't be. Iraq will not go back to the way it was. So what we have to think differently. What we did before, what we have done before, what may have worked before, will not work today. And it isn't just about Iraq what's happened, because now Iraq is in a context of the whole Middle East. The whole Middle East today is different than it was 10 years ago. Syria, it's the tragedy of Syria and what's happened in that country. And the Arab Spring that everybody was so optimistic and so encouraged about, going from that with the expectation of the transition to democracy has not happened. Look at Egypt. Libya is a mess. Bahrain is in turmoil. Yemen. The only country that is actually, when you think about in all of these messes, the only two places that seems to get us on the track is Tunisia and northern Iraq, the Kurdish region, where the economy is working, you have a full parliament, and you have the military to support it. So why did this happen? I mean, my own personal perspective. And we can go back and look at all history of Iraq. People want to know it's all about Sunni and Shia. It goes back to the 7th century. So it's about, but it's not. And that's a very simplistic explanation. Because over the years, as Islam grew and had their empire, in fact, the Abbasid Empire, the Caliphate, which these guys want to be, was in Baghdad between 750 to 1250 until it was destroyed by the Mongols. And at that time, it was liberal, it was inclusive, it was all about science and literature and translations and poetry, and very, very inclusive of all religions and other peoples. The ISIS group, they claim to be that, exactly what they're not. There's never an Islamic dynasty or a caliphate that does the kind of brutality, the kind of fanaticism that these guys proclaim. But anyway, so where should we start? I think probably the way to start is to look back at World War I. And that's where it really began. I mean, Iraq and Syria and all those countries were under the Ottoman rules. During the Ottoman rules for 400 years, there were no boundaries, there were no borders. What they did, the Ottoman Turks, actually they were very clever. They had provinces, what they called vilayet, which provinces related to a kind of monolithic group. So for example, in Iraq, or today's modern Iraq, there were three. There was the province of Basra, which is mostly Shia. There was the province of Baghdad, which was mostly Sunni Arabs. And there was a province of Mosul, which was mostly Kurds. After the First World War, of course, the Brits and the French, the Sykes-Picot Agreement we all know about, they divided the countries and put the borders the way they saw fit. And from the very beginning, uprisings from the Kurds, from the Shia, were happening all the time. And in the 1950s, the old monarchies that were imposed in some of those countries got toppled one after another. King Farouk in Egypt, 1952, 1958, King Faisal in Iraq, and in Libya when Gaddafi took over from the monarch. But then after that, the 60s, 70s, 80s became the rule of the dictators. So in that period of time, dictators, the Middle East, aside from the Arab Middle East, was dominated by dictatorships with either military or absolute monarchies. And that's what we have. But in that process, with the dictators, especially in Iraq with Saddam, he was the most ruthless. In fact, his hero was Stalin. That should tell you something. But what they did, the turmoil within the country of ethnic issues, of sectarian issues, of Sunni, Shia, and Kurd, were there. It was boiling. He put a lid on it through brutality. But the boiling pot was still going on. Then September 11th happens, and a big hit. It really changed the psyche of the Americans. How can this be? So we invaded Iraq in 2003. Now, on the premise of weapons of mass destruction was there, or that they were part of the September 11 conspiracy. Either one of them was true. But many supported the invasion of Americans for a simple reason, is to rid Saddam forever and liberate the 30 million people that lived under his brutality. But what happened is within less than 6 months, even those who supported the invasion became extremely disappointed. Number of blunders that we did. Number one, we took over a country without enough military to occupy it properly. And in fact, there were many of the military analysts says we should have had 400,000 or 500,000 troops to pacify it. And second, probably the biggest blunder that we did, we dismantled the Iraqi army, which was about 500-some thousand people, and then they were gone, they were done, no jobs, so they went home with their guns and they became insurgents. They could have easily taken over the police roles, they could have taken over the border patrol, they could have taken over many of the securities. And then if you remember right away, that 2003, 2004, Baghdad, you couldn't even go out at night. The criminals, the thugs, the insurgents, they just came out because nobody could control them. There was no safety, there was no security. So that was a really fundamental blunder that we did in our policy. And the second one is we acquiesced to some of the leaders in what we called the de-Ba'athification. And what that was is Saddam's party was called the Ba'ath Party for 30-some years. But they were the bureaucrats. They were running the government agencies, they were running the ministries, they were running, and they got rid of it. And they became disenfranchised, and they became the brainchild of the anti-government process. So both of these, we didn't stop it. In fact, the dismantling of the military was our doing. De-Ba'athification was the Iraqis doing, and we agreed to it. But the good thing that we did do is we helped pass a constitution that establishes a federal system that allows regions to be autonomous, the 3-4 regions. Now, so this is our what we have established. And then when we in 2011, when we left, and we couldn't leave a force behind just for established stability, some people are criticizing the administration for not doing that. The reality is the Iraqi government under Maliki now would not sign the order that protects the American military and the courts of Iraq. And that doesn't happen anywhere in the world. So we couldn't. And some say the administration was eager to leave and didn't push too hard. But the reality was by then, the Iraqi government was being very much controlled by Iran, which is a major Shia country. And they dictated who's going to be the prime minister. And they dictated, part of it from what I read and what I hear, is that Americans have to leave and not to sign the agreement. We supported Maliki's election in 2006. By 2010 election, he didn't win it, but it was imposed upon the Iraqis, and we supported it again. But it became evident by then, when he took power, that he was extremely sectarian, extremely authoritarian. So for most Iraqis, they replaced one tyrant with a Ba'ath party to another tyrant with a Dawa party. And it was an unfortunate turn of events. So the Sunnis, especially in the west, the Anbar province, many tribes, totally disillusioned, totally disenfranchised from the government. And the Kurds are the ones that were probably more than any there, they had their independence since 1991, autonomy. And they used it, and they used it very wisely. But they were always being in battle with the central government of Baghdad. Now, when you weigh all of these, at the same time, you saw the Arab Spring, and especially what happened in Syria. And what was going on in Syria is the brutality of Assad and what's happened. The beginnings of ISIS actually started in Iraq, and there was called the Al-Qaeda of Mesopotamia. Then as in a short reprieve were the Sunnis in the awakening in 2007, through the efforts of General Petraeus, fought them and beat them. And they really did. And they really were ready to be part of Iraq and be part of what's going on. But what happened as soon as we left, Maliki ignored all the promises we have made to them, and they again became completely bitter. And that's where the strength of some of the ISIS and some of the extremists began. They moved to Syria, and that's where they established ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham. And unfortunately, as what we have done, what the Iraqi government has done, the regional powers, especially Iran, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and Turkey, in some cases they were not very helpful. Iran was pushing very hard to supporting Syria. Iran was dominating what's happening in Iraq. And Iran was helping Hezbollah in Syria. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, because being a Sunni, the sense of the Sunni Arabs, were supporting, including some of the Gulf states, supporting the insurgents against the Syrian government, and some of them were the extremists, were ISIS. So you have these regional battles going on. You have fires in Syria, and you have a government in Baghdad that's not responding. So today, ISIS is on the outskirts of Baghdad. They cannot conquer Baghdad. Baghdad is 6 million people, most Shia, they really can't. They don't want to, but they can make life very miserable to the Iraqis. And the first time you see what's happening is that the Iranians are beginning to understand that this is really no good. They don't want to be taking care of this turmoil. They're already stretched, their economy is in shambles, and they're already overcommitted in Syria. And this battle between them and the Sunnis is a no-win battle for nobody. And I think the Saudis beginning to realize that this battle between the Sunnis and the Shia is spilling over, and it's not a winning battle for them either. In fact, they have sent there's word that they're sending 30,000 troops to protect the borders of Jordan so ISIS does not penetrate and go into Jordan. So what we may be seeing is a convergence of some common interests. Some common interest between the key players, especially the Iran-Saudi Arabia component. But of course, we're negotiating with Iran about the nuclear weapons. Israel is very concerned about the existential implication of nuclear power with Iran. Turkey is a player and working closely with the Kurds, but they're also worried about their own Kurds. So we've got a lot of interesting dynamics that's going on. What should we do? Number one, we are not going to beat ISIS militarily, and we shouldn't even try, because we will not win. It's a mistake. And I think even if you talk to the people on the ground, this is another attempt by the American military on the ground is a serious mistake. Now, we have advisors, yes, and we may use air power, but we have to be very careful how we're going to use air power, because most of these insurgents are in cities. And they're integrated into the community. How can you? And you try to attack and kill civilians, the damage to us will become even more profound. So here is, I think there is a formula that, and secondly, and we're insisting that Iraq be whole, but part of being whole is you have to have the right government, replacing Maliki that's inclusive, that brings the Sunnis, that brings the Kurds together, so they're all feeling secure in being part of Iraq. Here's the dilemma. Maliki does not want to go. And they're trying to see how, and even if Maliki goes, the Sunni and the Kurds are saying, wait a minute, there has to be a clarity. There has to be a clarity on the Constitution and the federal system that gives us economic autonomy, military autonomy. It's a confederate system or a federal system comparable to the UAE, comparable to Canada. And how do you get there? How do you achieve it? So part of what I think could be the formula is not to go back. There is no way Iraq can go back the way it was. It won't be acceptable. The Kurds are threatening independence. They've already had talked to the parliament, the President Barzani, to start a process of a referendum, whether the Kurds want to be an independent nation. And I'm sure if I have the referendum, there will be overwhelmingly yes. But right now, I don't think the timing is correct for the Kurds. The Sunni says there's no way they will become part of Iraq if Maliki is still in government. But they also say, and this is coming from the tribal leaders, we can defeat ISIS. They're strangers. These are armies that come from, made up of Somalis, of Americans, of Brits, of Chechens, of South Americans. They have nothing to do with Iraq. We can beat them, but we cannot, not knowing what the future of governance of Iraq is. So there is where we're caught. What I think we need to do, I mean personally, is through real aggressive diplomacy. It will be a big feat if somehow we can get Iran and Saudi Arabia to reconcile that Sunni Shia, I think at least as a start, as a peace offering. Have a senior person, like the foreign minister of Iran, going to Saudi Arabia for the first time. A big step. Iranians are and in spite of their winning Iraq, they really don't want to deal with it. The Saudis are afraid of it. So there is some common interest, and we could be the catalyst to make those changes happen. And we cannot ignore what's going on in Syria, but the same players play in Syria. So the Iranians are going to be an important player with pressure. We cannot back off insisting on the nuclear weapon issue. But I think Iran is ready to talk to Saudi Arabia, and we need that kind of a group of regional powers to help and assure and get the Sunnis on board with the assurances. We get them on board, the fighting on the ground with ISIS will be by the people that live there themselves, helped by the Kurdish Peshmerga, helped by the Iraqi army. And the same thing with the Kurds. The Kurds says we don't want our independence. If we can are guaranteed our borders like we were promised, we're guaranteed that we have our right to sell our energy and oil. But so far, it hasn't been resolved. But it has to be diplomatic. It has to be through diplomacy. And it cannot be through American military power. It just doesn't work. And then we have to accept the fact, if this doesn't work, if we have a very intransigent central government of Baghdad, splitting Iraq in 3 countries, frankly, is not that bad. I mean, you think about it, Iraq is a very rich country. The richest part of it in terms of energy is the south part, is Basra, where all this, so if you split it into 3, where you have Baghdad and have quite a bit of Sunni, but all the way through south of the Basra is 2.5 million, 3 million barrels of oil a day goes through it. That's the richest part of Iraq. The Kurds have Kirkuk and have Erbil. They will do well. The Anbar Sunni province is rich in minerals and oil reserves and natural gas. So if you have a global understanding and not fight it all the time to bring Humpty Dumpty back together again and assume that this scenario may very well work. If the first option of getting the government to be inclusive is not working, but it doesn't work by our demanding it. It cannot, because they say, we won't listen to you. But it can work if we bring the players in the region on board. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey especially. Get them on board, because they will have a huge stake in what's going on, and make them become part of the solution. Anyway, so that's my story, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to listen.
I have a question. Tell us how to get them on board. Can we have a summit in Portland? At your house?
How to get them on board? Well, that's up to the diplomats. How would the Secretary Kerry and the President? Yes?
Seems like the Saudi Arabia for years has kind of stood on the sidelines, and a lot of the terrorists have moved out of Saudi Arabia and such that they talk a lot, but yet they don't seem to contribute to the solution to the dialogue over the place.
Well, I think if Saudi Arabia is 30-some million people, and it's really the center of Islam, and it is conservative, and they have supported some people they shouldn't have. But I think now with a couple of things that's happened with the Arab Spring in Egypt, what happened with the Muslim Brotherhood, they won and now they're out, and they're very concerned about extremism in Islam. They're realizing that extremism is hurting everybody. ISIS is to them is about as ugly as it can get. So I think there's a recognition that has to be done. And I think there's also another recognition that for the first time, feeding that flame of Sunni and Shia is not doing anybody any good. So it's setting up some dialogue with Iran, and I think with our help could be the first step. Yes, ma'am, in the back. Yes, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask you about Kurdistan. Some time ago, they, as you well know, they contracted through a big company, Jamel, I believe it's called Jamel, to build a pipeline up through
Yes.
Turkey from Turkey, I believe, somewhere in the Kurdish region, over to Salam.
Seyhan.
Where it's then loaded onto a big ship down into Israel, into, starts with an A, I can't think of it, the Gaza Strip. I'm kind of wondering if this, since it's in Israel territory, if you think that that might have something to do with the recent war going on in Israel and Hamas, and also how much of, is this going to destabilize? You're saying that it's not the right time for the Kurds to become independent. However, I'm just kind of wondering if this big company is backing the Kurds for their independence. And how much is that going to destabilize everything right now? So anyway, I just sort of wanted to know clarification on this whole situation.
The question is about the Kurdish pipeline oil going through Turkey and into the Mediterranean and being shipped. Actually, the Kurdish regional government, which is Kurdistan, just signed a 50-year agreement with the government of Turkey to supply them oil. And they build their pipeline independent of Baghdad. And Baghdad actually is trying to sue them for that. And what happened when they had 2 or 3 tankers, for a while, there was no place to download them, because the word is there was pressure from the US not to download, because they felt that that would aggravate the Iraqis. They wanted the Iraqi to be together. So Israel, I think the word is one of the ships were bought by Israel. And Israel was one of the first countries that said we will support an independent Kurdistan. And there are a number of others who said the same thing. But I think we have to be, the Kurds realize they really need to be wise. They're landlocked. And if you look at the Kurds, they're landlocked. There's Syria on one side, Iran on one side, the Iraqi government on one side, and Turkey on one side. And all of the 3 countries, all of them, are afraid of independent Kurdistan. Because many of them have Kurds within Iraq and Iran, in Turkey. Half of the Kurdish population is in Turkey. But at the same time, the major trading partner between the Kurds of Iraq and Turkey is Turkey. So they realize it's a great economic benefit for both. But at the same time, they're trying to balance that within their own Kurdish people. So there was a lot of complexities. The Kurds, if you went to a referendum today, I no question in my mind, 90% of them will say yes, that we really want our independence. Because they have gone through so much genocide and ethnic cleansing and so forth. But they have to be, but they're realistic at the same time. If they're part of Iraq, and Iraq is functioning as a real federal or confederate system, they'll be fine. They have said that. Their fear is Iraq is so broken that it may never get there. And that's what they're afraid of, and that's where they're really at least getting the groundwork started, so if they ever need to go to a referendum and establish a country.
I was in Saudi Arabia in the first Gulf War and saw some of the dynamics going on then. And then I was in Kirkuk in 2008, 2009. During that time, it was pretty well known to us that Erbil was building a large base just to the southwest, specifically inviting us to retain a force there. And it seemed that would have been a very logical thing, or at least an option to consider in 2011 when we pulled out and Baghdad was not giving us the assurances. In the meantime, Erdogan up in Turkey has changed his colors a little bit. So if you could describe whether or not it would be in our best interest today to recognize the successes in the Kurdistan region by placing a larger force there or moving our embassy there, and whether or not the dynamics with Erdogan would change in Turkey.
I don't think we need to make a major shift, abandon Baghdad for the sake of Kurdistan. If we did that, we will alienate many of the Arab communities. We really will. The Kurds have been great supporters of our policy, U.S. And the U.S. historically, even though they have been problems of in the past, have been supporters of the Kurds. But right now, the public policy is Iraq to be intact. And bring American military into Kurdistan, frankly, I'm not sure, we could. I mean, the Kurds would definitely allow it, but the Kurds have developed their own 200,000 man army, and they're professional, they're doing well. So I think the main thing is for us, the US, to realize here is a bright spot of democracy and development, even though there are problems of civil laws and corruptions and so forth, but it's working. Let's help it.
I didn't mean like a combat brigade there now, which is what they wanted back then.
Back then, yes.
Now. But to be able to use that base for our drones, for military aircraft support, and to just basically show our support or recognition of the successes of the Kurdistan.
I think we should. I think we should let them know. I think we should recognize them. But I think we should also let them know that we have to be, our policy have to be careful to deal with all the players. Yes.
A comment and a question. The comment I have is that I think we have to realize that the Kurds are really integrated throughout Turkey, not just in that southeast corner. I don't know how many millions of Kurds live in Istanbul, as an example. And they're pretty much as businessmen and so forth and so on. So I think the Kurdish situation in Turkey, especially now with Erdogan having a good relationship with the Kurds, and the Kurds feel strongly about that relation, I think that's going to begin to become more positive as time goes on. The question I have, though, we talk about Baghdad being Shia, or having that strong Shia component, and then you have the Kurdistan. Who is going to be the representatives to speak on behalf of ISIS? I mean, we talk about this caliph, quote unquote, but who really is the power out there to become the spokesman for that body of people?
Well, number one, ISIS has to be fought. You cannot have ISIS controlling that region. ISIS is an anomaly, but they're dangerous. They have $2 billion in the bank, from what I understand. They have strong military, and they have people coming from other parts of the world to join this crazy notion of caliphate. So it has to be fought. So my thinking, a lot of people think the same way, is the people most likely to fight them are the people that live in that region, who are the Sunnis. The Sunni Arabs in Anbar and Mosul. Especially if we guarantee their rights, if we give them their own regional autonomy, if we make sure that de-Baathification is resolved, they will fight them and they will beat them. I mean, they really can, and because they've done it, they did it in 2007. But the longer we wait, the bigger, and in terms of marketing strategy, these guys will become emboldened, and you will have more crazies joining them. And they will be an incredible pariah throughout the region, no question about it. So they have to be stopped. So we have this dual track thing that we have to do. On one hand, we have to fight ISIS. On the other hand, recognize this is a diplomatic, political solution that will fix the military solution. Yes, somebody here?
Yeah. Do you think our administration and diplomatic corps are really flexible enough to be able to pull something like this off? To me, it doesn't seem like they've got the will. They're stuck in such a rigid approach.
Are you a Republican or a Democrat?
I would say I'm an independent.
I think, to be honestly, there was criticism of, I hear criticism of our administration from overseas, when I'm with Arab friends, Kurdish friends, so Sunni, Shia, doesn't matter. But the criticism is really, it's a funny criticism. On one hand, they really don't want us involved in the military because they know the implications of that. On the other hand, they feel we are gone a bit too far, become a bit too detached. In a way, and in some ways, you can't win no matter what. But and some of that detachment, whether we are fully into the Arab-Israeli, Palestinian-Israeli situation, or how we dealt with monarchy and so forth. I think the administration is very, very careful. Number one, made the promise to leave Iraq, and that was the right thing, and not to get back into the military, back in the region, and that's the right thing. But some are critical that our leadership is needed. Maybe not the military, but our leadership is absolutely needed. And I agree with that. I think we can make a lot of inroads. We have economic power. We have power of sanctions. The military is always there if it completely gets out of hand, but not make that into a military solution. I would assume with our administration, with the Secretary of State and our President and others, they know what's going on. And they're playing the public statements and the private discussions probably well.
We read that the Syrian-Iraqi border has pretty much evaporated and never had any validity, for that matter, as a national division. But what are the implications of what you're saying for the Syrian situation and vice versa?
Yeah, you're right, absolutely right. The Syrian border is gone. And I think a model, if the model does finally work for the Iraq as a federal system with its regions, that model may very well work with Syria. Because Syria has the same dynamics, has the same demographics. In the north, it's Kurds. But it's the reverse for the rest. In Iraq, where the majority are Shia and the minority are Sunni, in Syria is the opposite. It's the majority Sunni that is ruled by the minority Alawiyat, which is Shia. But there is a way that can also become a federal system, similar to what's happening in Iraq. But Syria has to be resolved. It's a tragedy. But the resolution, we cannot just do it ourselves. We have to get the regional powers engaged, and we may even have, maybe not direct, maybe indirect discussion with Bashar al-Assad. I mean, this is about saving human lives when the whole country is destroyed, and we should be bold. We should be knowing that the rules in the past may not have worked. Let's make it happen. Yes?
How much is the conflict in Iraq religious, and how much is it economic or business? Because, oftentimes it's simplified to say, Shia and Sunni and Kurds. I wonder how much is really religious.
Well, I think the religious part is there, it's real, but it's not the driver. I really think the economic thing. Remember, the Shia of Iraq were brutalized by Saddam, and so were the Sunnis of Iraq, so were the Kurds. And now the Shias have to have power, they will never give it up. At the end of the day, whether it's Iraq, the Shia and the Sunni, and who's in charge, or whether it's Syria, individuals can make a difference. A leader can make a difference. We don't have a Nelson Mandela in the Middle East, unfortunately. But there are people, I've met many Shia who are bright and intelligent, there are intermarriage between the Sunni and Shia. There's not lack of trying. I think with the right leadership can change many things. But let's be honest, if now that we have inflamed the situation so badly, maybe the solution is to separate. Let's separate. And then in separation, they become stronger. They bring back the trust and the confidence that they had lost. So the idea of 3 regions, whether it's independent countries or autonomous regions, is the only way you're going to solve that problem. And not to be afraid of it. Not to be afraid of it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a similar question about religion. With ISIS and its fundamental extremism, how much of that is truly that? How much of it is also a desire to acquire real estate and oil You know, is it pure, or is there a mixture of economics and religion?
Well, if you look at some of those extremists, there's always huge amounts of money behind it. A lot of these extremists have made money through kidnappings. They have made their money through selling illegal drugs, and so forth. With ISIS, they don't care about boundaries. They care about a brutal Islamic state that no Muslim would want. So I think sooner or later, there will be, if they're still there, they will internally battle with the people in the Mosuls and the Takrits. Because these are educated people, these are bright people. They won't allow it. But that'll take time and patience, and we have to just give it the right level of comfort that only American leadership can supply, and bring all the players to come together. One more question? Yes.
It's actually sort of two questions, but I'll jump to one. The New York Times today reported that the ISIS captured the old chemical warfare sarin factories on the outskirts of Baghdad. Is there a possibility that ISIS could go into chemical warfare? And do you have any idea what the American response would be?
Well, if there's anything that'll bring the American response right away, it would be that. No, seriously, because that's such a dangerous game. I mean, look, and there's international protocols against it. Look at what happened in Syria and the agreement. ISIS is going to overreach, and they will sooner or later. They may have already. They cannot invade and control Baghdad, but they have enough military power, and enough money, and enough crazy recruits to make it very difficult for quite a while in that region. Okay, somebody in the back that, yes, no, in the back.
Yes, you.
Yes, you.
Comprehensive approach. I have two things to say. First, I think separating Iraq, integrating as a state, will only enhance the feelings of hatred toward West in that region, and there will be no peace in the Middle East, including Hamas now fighting with Israel. So my other thing is that the United States influence is very powerful. Malik has been relying on it. So can United States government now help partners in Baghdad select a different person, which might be Adi Abdel Mahdi? He's a moderate, everybody likes him. Is that a possibility to use U.S. power?
I'm glad you brought up Adi Abdel Mahdi. Adi Abdel Mahdi, by the way, he's a PhD. He's Iraqi Shia, is highly respected, and if he was the person to replace Maliki, I think both the Sunni and the Kurds will accept him. He is, in fact, he graduated from the same high school I did. So he has to be good, right? But I think he is, but the key is now to how do you push Maliki out? But Adi Abdel Mahdi right now is the leading candidate to replace Maliki. And if that happens, Iraq will be intact. And I agree with you, having Iraq at this time to be intact as a federal state and create a province, just like Kurdistan did, out of Anbar and Nineveh, and let them have their autonomous. But there is Iraq, that is one place, and that is intact, and that can work. Thank you all very much.
I just wanted to make sure to invite you to send us or get on our mailing list if you're interested in programs like this. It's the best way to know about what's coming up. We send emails out frequently, or visit our website www.worldoregon.org. And thanks again for coming. Enjoy the rest of the sunny afternoon.